Mute you in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Ensemble Network webcast. I apologize for the delay. We just had a little bit of technical difficulty. Thank you to all of our listeners who tuned in today. We are very excited to get this webcast underway and hear from our fantastic panel of guest speakers as they share their thoughts on addressing gender-based violence in mining. As we know, this has become a topic and an HR priority for many different companies in all industries, and has also been addressed through legislation in various parts and regions. My name is Jennifer Wright. I'm the Senior Director of Program Development for the Mining Industry Human Resources Council, and I'm happy to be here with you today to discuss such an important topic. As many of you know, MIRA established its mandate to identify opportunity and ultimately address the HR and labor market challenges in the Canadian minerals and metals sector. The Canadian mining industry faces a significant challenge in establishing a sustainable supply of labor that is able to withstand mining's economic volatility. MIR, through its labor market intelligence, has identified a number of factors exacerbating this challenge. Canada's aging population continues to have a significant impact, and diverse groups such as women and newcomers to Canada are underrepresented in the mining labor force. Our research indicates that women comprise half of Canada's population and about 48% of its labor force, yet in the mining labor force, women represent only 17%. Improving this statistic involves a combination of collaborative solutions, from encouraging young girls to pursue math and science studies, to building a gender-inclusive awareness of the industry, to appointing more women to senior leadership and board positions. In 2012, Barrick Gold and White Ribbon launched a multi-year initiative to prevent gender violence and promote gender equality with a focus on men as champions. Today's webcast will provide an overview of the partnership, the 3 sites, and lessons and reflections on successes, challenges, and what we learned through this partnership. Allow me to take this opportunity to introduce our excellent panel of guest speakers and provide a little bit of information about each of them and what they do. The first guest speaker that I'm going to talk about is Brian Mason, Program Manager of Native American Affairs. Brian is an enrolled member of the Shoshone Paiute tribes of the Duck Valley Indian Reservation and the grandson of Thomas Premo and Anna Frank Premo and the son of Naomi Premo Mason. Prior to working with Barrick Gold, he served in the United States Marine Corps for over 20 years. After retiring from the Marine Corps, he worked in wildlife fire suppression as a senior firefighter with the U.S. Forest Service in Great Basin and Pacific Northwest. Mr. Mason started working with Barrick Gold Corporation as an environmental engineer at Cortez Gold Mine, and later became an environmental superintendent at Barrick's Ruby Hill Mine, interacting with regulatory officials from state and federal organizations. He also has experience with Native American issues while working as a cultural resource and archaeological site manager, working within guidelines set by Section 106 process of the National Historic Preservation Act, Programmatic Agreements, and National Environmental Policy Act. Our second guest speaker is Jessica Bentley Jacobs, Manager Sustainability Partnerships at Barrick Gold Corporation. Jessica has over 12 years international experience with a focus on building teams, developing strategies for revenue growth, and stakeholder engagement. Her experience working in the private and nonprofit sectors provides the ability to work collaboratively with diverse partnerships and communities to understand and solve complex problems. Prior to joining Barrick in 2017, Jessica worked as Director, Marketing and Business Development for Princess Charities Canada. Jessica graduated from McGill with a bachelor degree in Arts, International Relations and Affairs, before attending Georgetown University, where she completed her MSFS, International Relations and Commerce and Finance. Our third guest speaker is Umberto Carlo, Executive Director, White Ribbon. Umberto is a gender-based violence prevention specialist with over 18 years experience in the not-for-profit sector, with expertise in gender equality, human rights, HIV/AIDS, education, community development, research, social marketing, strategic planning, and multi-sectoral partnerships. Umberto's current role is focused on developing educational strategies to engage men and boys in promoting gender equity, healthy masculinities, and preventing violence against women. This includes strategic program development and evaluation at the local and international level, research, technical assistance, and capacity building, resource and campaign development, and fostering new partnerships. Our fourth guest speaker is Chi Nyan, CEO of Parker P. Consulting, White Ribbon Social Enterprise. Her team has worked with universities, mining firms, the UN, and the Canadian Armed Forces to develop and deliver programming to address gender equity and inclusion and violence prevention challenges. Chi was a founding director at Mass LBP and worked with CBC, United Way, Toronto, and York Region. A recipient of the 2004 Governor General's Award in commemoration of the Persons Case, Chi holds a Master in Science from the London School of Economics in Health, Community, and Development. And with that, I will hand it over to Chi to begin the presentation.
Well, thank you very much to the team at MIR for giving us the opportunity to share a little bit about this really unique partnership between our organizations. We're delighted to spend a bit of time with you today to tell you about this work that took place over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. What we hope to do with this this time is to have a sort of conversational approach, and I hope it doesn't drive our colleagues at MIR up the wall as they mute and unmute each of our panelists. But we thought it was really important to have a kind of tag team approach to this conversation as we did in terms of the work. So I'm going to invite my colleague Umberto to say a few words about White Ribbon. As soon as I advance the slide, there we go.
Thank you, Chi, and thanks everybody for having me on this panel. White Ribbon is a charitable organization based here in Toronto, in Canada. Our organization was started 2 years after the December 6th Montreal massacre, and by a group of men in Toronto who felt that there needed to be more opportunities for men to come forward and speak out against violence against women. Our vision is a future with no violence against women. Our mission is engaging men and boys in preventing that violence, in promoting healthy masculinities and promoting gender equality. The White Ribbon is a symbol. It's a pledge of men's commitment to never commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women. We're a national, international NGO working on primary prevention of violence against women of all kinds by engaging men and boys using a strength-based and gender-transformative approach. We're a globally recognized issue leader in this work. We work with federal, provincial, and international, including UN governments and corporations to develop strategies, interventions, training, and capacity building for communities and organizations around the world. Our work is complementary to the services, supports, and programs provided to support survivors of gender-based violence and violence against women. The work to prevent violence with men and boys needs to happen side by side with support services and programs that provide much needed relief and support to survivors of violence.
Well, sorry, you can hear some traffic coming across our office in our neighborhood. My apologies. I'm going to ask Jessica to say a few words about Barrack now.
Great. Thank you. I'm just looking for that Barrack slide, but in the interim, I did also want to say thank you for everyone on the line for joining us for this presentation on such an important topic, and for MIR for organizing this call, and of course to our partners at White Ribbon and Parker P for asking us to join this call. It really is such a pleasure to be here today to talk about this. As mentioned, my name is Jessica, and I recently joined Barrack as a Sustainability Partnership Manager. Some of you on the call may know about Barrack, but let me provide you with a brief overview. Barrick is a gold mining company with operations in many countries, and you can see on the map where some of our mines are located. Our vision is a generation of wealth through responsible mining, wealth for our owners, our people, and the countries and communities with which we partner. Our sustainability vision really flows from this vision, and it's that we partner with the host governments and communities to transform their natural resources into sustainable benefits and mutual prosperity. We aim to be a welcome and trusted partner of host governments and communities, the most sought-after employer, and the natural choice for long-term investors. This sustainability vision is key for us, and it really helps to direct and focus our work. As mentioned, the relationship between Barrick and White Ribbon is such an important one for us. It began over 5 years ago when we committed to work with White Ribbon to raise awareness on the issue of gender-based violence and to drive prevention. We really like the approach that White Ribbon takes by engaging men as part of the solution to ending gender-based violence, and that they don't take a one-size-fits-all approach. They really tailor their approach and programs to reflect each unique context, and this was really important for us. Through this partnership, White Ribbon has worked with us in now 4 countries, and you'll hear more about that later, to help us really understand the issue of gender-based violence, the root causes of it in the communities close to our mines, and how we can work to prevent it. Each community and location is different, and White Ribbon develops programs tailored to the unique needs of each. This partnership has greatly benefited from the trust, respect, and candor with each other, and we've really appreciated and learned a lot from working with White Ribbon. I'm pleased to also have my colleague, Brian Mason, here on the line from our Nevada office, who is instrumental in the partnership between White Ribbon and that office there. You'll hear more about that partnership in Nevada later, but for now, Brian, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Can everybody hear me? Hello?
Hi, Brian. Yep, go ahead. Brian, we are all able to hear you. If you're
So perhaps we'll pick up Brian again in a couple of moments when we start speaking to the work and get him back on the speaking on the line again. It's Chi here again. So what I'd like to do now is just to set the stage in terms of the work and how we approach and the question of gender-based violence in the global environment. So we know that gender-based violence is an epidemic that is experienced not just in North America, but is a global phenomenon. We know of the high incidence rates across the globe, and for us, we've seen the impacts and the harms of this cascade in many ways. And while many 1 in 3 women experience, that's the sort of global statistics of women's experience around gender violence, we know that most perpetrators of this sexual violence are men. We do know that there are places in the world where levels of violence are more epidemic and more significant. And these are places and climates where there is rapid social and economic change. There's shifting sort of political, cultural climates in terms of shifts in employment, places where there's insufficient rule of law, high levels of alcohol and drug use, as well as what we talk about as very male-dominated cultures. It's places in which misogyny and very strong ideas around masculinity as toxic prevail. In terms of an overall approach to this, we know that this has been around for a long time and has been with us for centuries and decades, and the aims to end and eradicate violence against women and girls and equally to promote gender equality is extremely challenging to address. We're faced with a lot of history against us, but I think there's a real awareness, and we're in a very interesting cultural moment, especially on the heels of what's happening in North America and the U.S. Around recognition of pockets of industries where we're seeing real exposure to understanding what the costs are for employers and for women who have been survivors of gender violence in the workplace and beyond. Now, specifically speaking to the extractive sector, there are some things at play that can create what we call catalytic factors for gender-based violence. And part of this for us that we've seen is around people sort of not having their traditional social safety networks, a disruption and distance from family and communities, new levels of income as people are making sort of different income levels and have access to different resources. And in certain communities, a lack of meaningful decision-making power for women in specific climates that we work in. So in terms of what the white ribbon approach is, in terms of our sort of principles and how we think about this, we really focus on making sure that men are part of the solution. We like to address this, as Jessica talked about and mentioned, and our approach is really thinking about the root causes and where the violence really is generated from. And we think about this as the impacts of gender inequality as having damaging effects for both men and women, and so we invite everybody to come to the table to really ask deep questions about social norms and gender stereotypes that everybody is impacted by. And then we work really hard to ensure that any of the interventions and approaches are culturally relevant and appropriate. We co-design these efforts and these solutions with community members so that people have ownership and are really invested in what comes out of the conversations and our approach and our work. It's very much grounded in a real strong community development model. And lastly, we work at implementing, testing, and iterating. We know that the first cut may not be the right one, so we continue to have these conversations to evolve and make sure that the approaches are right for the environments that we're operating. And so in terms of how we worked with Barrack, we undertook a really extensive environmental scan and lit review and went into the field and had interviews, focus groups, and really got to know the landscape before we determined any kind of path of action. And the next phase for us was then to identify some of these gender-based violence challenges and then propose a series of potential interventions, programs, and tools and strategies that could address these. Over the course of the third and final phase, we worked on designing and implementing tools that worked both either inside the fence as well as outside the fence to build relationships and really take a community-minded approach to ending and preventing gender violence. Finally, we made sure that there was strong capacity building and that the skills really remained in the community and adapted and tested out the gender-based violence programs. So I want to talk a little bit about the partnership of Barrack and White Ribbon, and I'm going to ask Umberto to speak to this. And Jess, if you have any thoughts to add, feel free to jump in as well.
Thank you, Chi. And as Jessica mentioned earlier, this was a tremendous opportunity for two organizations coming from very different backgrounds to meaningfully and effectively work together on addressing an issue that's, as Chi mentioned, so pervasive in our society. And I can say from our perspective here at White Ribbon that Barrack was and is a terrific partner to work with, and we really appreciated the commitment, the openness, and especially the engagement of employees at all levels, from the front lines in the mine sites to mining management, to our colleagues at headquarters, and it made it for a really effective partnership. So we approached Barrack in 2012 with a proposal to engage with the company in gender-based violence prevention as a result of some challenges that the company was experiencing, in particular in Tanzania and in Papua New Guinea. So we agreed to form a collaboration, a partnership, and we picked 3 sites around the world where we thought we could test out some approaches and initiatives. We we chose Papua New Guinea as a highly volatile region with a great deal of conflict and some tremendous challenges around addressing men's violence against women. We picked Zambia because although challenges were present there, there were some initiatives that were already on the ground that were meant to address those challenges. And then we looked at northeastern Nevada as another setting where there was a tremendous opportunity for us to test out some approaches, and in particular working with the Western Shoshone indigenous communities and youth communities and local women's organizations as well. So this started in 2012 and continued until 2016, and the work was conducted through White Ribbon, through Parker P Consulting, our social enterprise, and has recently led us to do some subsequent work with the company in the Dominican Republic this year. So our approach, our partnerships involved, as Chi mentioned, connecting with local women's organizations, with other stakeholders, and getting a real understanding of the challenges, the context, the opportunities, and the needs from both inside the fence in terms of needs from the workforce itself, but also from the communities. So. And out of those consultations emerged some really amazing and unique interventions, which we will talk about next. So starting with northeastern Nevada.
Great, thank you very much, Umberto. I'm going to ask Brian to say a few words about his experience working with us locally in Nevada.
Am I heard? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Brian.
Oh, okay. So basically, when we were doing it in Nevada with the Western Shoshone tribes, they opted to do a more of a traditional cultural angle on it, which really worked well. So when White Ribbon came in, you know, they kind of sit down and listen to the tribes who wanted to address it at more of a traditional angle. In other words, you know, before European contact, you know, a lot of the elders would speak to the point of, you know, there wasn't any domestic violence. I mean, women were respected, and so they wanted to use that angle to get more back. And engage with the youth more on letting them know that wasn't the Indian way per se, and it worked really well. And we worked with the tribes on establishing events on a pretty regular schedule, to including hosting some conferences that we'd bring all tribes in that we partner with at one time. And as we worked through it, I mean, it seems quite a long time that we did this, about 3 years, and you know, it seemed like it was just it went so fast. And when the tribes talked about it, we actually did a film, and some of the comments that were in the film, we did a documentary film at one of the conferences, and some of the comments towards the end, which we captured, were some pretty amazing statements. And I say that from a corporation standpoint, as extracting a resource from traditional lands, Western Shoshone lands, that they stated that a company came in, they said they were going to do something to assist the community, you know, in domestic violence, and that had happened, and they were pretty impressed, and they thought it was, you know, when you think about social responsibility and corporate citizen. They just thought that all corporate citizens would do that, you know, give back to the community, assist in a problem that affects so many communities throughout the, you know, at least the lower 48 for sure, and in Native American communities specifically. So on the one note, when White Ribbon left, unfortunately, so we partnered with White Ribbon and we helped, we assisted on this. And then as time went on, the tribes themselves lost funding. So a lot of their programs, aren't there right now because of budgeting cuts, in their governments. So, there was a lot of good, and then it kind of like dried up a little bit, and that's because of the tribes just couldn't sustain it themselves. There's a couple that have continued, but I could see a gap there, and those are my comments.
Thanks very much, Brian. I think we also felt that the work in Nevada was really powerful and really significant for the tribes in the area, and it's it's one of these pieces where the sustainability piece is always a question for ensuring that community partnerships and this kind of work can continue to move forward. I'm going to ask Umberto to speak a little bit to our next sites, which included Papua New Guinea and Zambia.
Yes, Chi, can you move to the next slide, please?
Yeah, I'm on Zambia. I think I've just pulled up Zambia now.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if I was starting with Zambia or Papua New Guinea. So, perfect. Well, we'll start with Zambia. So once we did the initial assessment at this particular mine site and in the community, we found that one of the major root causes of conflict in the home, in the family, was due to the lack of financial literacy amongst the couple. So we're talking about families who live on site in the mining estate, and also families that live just nearby, where predominantly the male in the family was working at the mine and was bringing relatively healthy income home. But because of financial illiteracy, those funds were, for the most part, quickly spent. And so families complained, in particular women complained, that towards the middle to the end of the month, there would be very few funds left to cover the basic needs of the family. So we determined that we understood from the focus group participants and the folks that we consulted with that led to a tremendous amount of conflict and the use of violence in the home. So we saw it as an opportunity, as a need to work with the workforce and also with the spouses and community members to help everyone understand financial literacy and how to better manage funds in the home and how to save and so forth. So we developed a gender transformative financial literacy program for employees and their spouses, and we infused that program with opportunities for equitable decision making amongst couples and amongst individuals in the family in regards to how money is going to be spent. We also coupled that with general gender-based violence prevention awareness and capacity building amongst frontline staff and community members. And in the end, 1,342 Lumwana employees and 235 township residents, so spouses of employees, participated in the training, and the evaluation demonstrated that there was an effective outcome, an increase in financial literacy, knowledge, skills, and understanding among participants of the benefits of shared decision making with their spouses. So in terms of success, we saw a decrease in the number of incidents of family violence as reported by the community health and welfare counselors at the estate, and it led to a strong partnership with the Bank of Zambia. One challenge in this particular site is that the program was eventually, it wasn't formally embedded into the training, so it wasn't sustaining. And we know in order for these types of education initiatives to be effective on the long run, they need to be continuous, and new employees need to be exposed to it. So that's definitely a lesson learned for us. And so in terms of our work in Papua New Guinea, and Chi, if you could move us to the next slide, I would appreciate that. So there we did both inside the fence, so consultations and focus groups and discussions with groups of employees, with HR, with leadership, on the current situation and the complexity of the needs. But we also connected with local groups, in particular with the the Porgera Women's Association, a group of an organization that provided services and supports to women, and also individuals and initiatives at the national level as well, to get a better understanding of the needs and opportunities and the complexity. As a result of that needs assessment, we decided to focus on in-defense programming. So what we had agreed with the local mine management was to do an assessment of the harassment training curriculum that was currently being offered to employees, and we infused that curriculum. We updated it with gender transformative approaches, strength-based education and engagement for, in particular, male employees, to better help them understand the role that they can play in ending sexual harassment and other forms of harassment in the workplace, but also to help female employees understand their rights and where to go for support and how to report and so forth. So in terms of successes there, we were able to reframe existing programming, ensuring that messages were better received, and by using a more strengths-based and inclusive approach. And what distinguished this particular site from Zambia is that this training became embedded. It became part of the mandatory training for all employees across the site, including all new employees. So it really created a shared understanding of the issues and expectations, and the training continues to be used. And it was as a result of the effectiveness and the positive results of this training that the company decided to offer it to the employees at its operations in the Dominica. Some of the challenges include the fact that there's a tremendous history of violence in the community, gender-based violence in particular, both within the fence and outside. So it's still a highly volatile conflict type of setting. So which led us to focus only on interventions inside the fence, and but there's tremendous needs and opportunities, of course, to work with local community organizations to do work outside of the fence. And we also know from the evidence base that when we do this kind of work in the workplace, it's best if it's coupled with general awareness and community engagement outside the workplace as well, so that the teachings, the lessons that are offered inside the workplace are validated and supported and sustained within the community itself.
Thanks, Humberto. So what I'd like to do now is just sort of wrap on some reflections and insights from the work. In terms of why we believe this work is really critical and important in terms of an approach and methodology, we feel strongly that having a sort of approach to gender-based violence prevention has multiple effects, both in terms of the workplace as well as community relations. We know that, and evidence is out there that speaks to the increased productivity of the workforce, ability for retention, as well as recruitment and safety in the workplace by creating environments that are gender inclusive and where women and men can thrive and succeed becomes an environment that people want to thrive and succeed in as well. We also know that addressing some of these sort of systemic gender violence challenges can result in stronger community relations in terms of the partners in the broader community, whether you're working with the tribes in Northern Nevada or community partners in the Moana. And this can be seen as a significant and important long-term investment in the community. Another important dimension to consider is how gender violence intersects with other social issues that can impact the overall health and well-being of a community, whether it's the use of substances, whether it's diversity and inclusion, or financial and economic components. I'd like to sort of wrap up by extracting a few lessons that we learned from our time working with our colleagues at Barrack. For us, this work is really about finding a way to engage men in these conversations, and for men to have an opportunity to look at their own gender roles and what this means in terms of how they act in the work environment and in the community. We think it's really critical that men are able to ask deep questions and tough questions, and sometimes what feels like can be silly questions, but are actually really significant. But to do this in a way that allows them to have some accountability to change their behaviors and to kind of step into being a more proactive a member of the team. We also think it's really critical for organizations to take on holistic approaches rather than sort of one-off pilots that aren't sustainable in terms of where it fits with the rest of the organization. So we've been really impressed with how Barrack has been able to integrate some of the lessons for Papua New Guinea, as well as now taking this to the Dominican Republic. Another thing that we think is really critical to think about when doing this work around gender equality is that gender equality really is now being positioned as not just good for men. It's really critically important that we see it as good, not just good for women, but actually important for men as well. All of this is efforts to make environments better and more hospitable for men and women, and so we need to do this in a way that really keeps those perspectives in mind. A really critical feature of any of this work is making sure that there is genuine zero tolerance for violence and harassment. You can't get to equity and you can't get to real inclusion unless these places are meaningfully safe for everyone. And from our work on the ground, we really couldn't have succeeded at doing this if we didn't have support from senior management and the folks who really understood the local environment. So, Brian Mason and others throughout the sites that we worked in. And again, another important dimension of this work is really how can you build this on to existing initiatives and infrastructure so that you're not recreating and starting from scratch something that then doesn't become part of the culture and really embedded in the work. And finally, it's really critical for us to take a community and ecological approach to this work, which means that women's organizations need to see this as valuable and an important complement to the work they're doing to ensure that women are able to achieve human rights. So that's a sort of overview and highlights of some of the approach and methodologies that we took in working alongside Barrack in trying to do some primary prevention work with the role of men and boys as a key thread to this. And what I'd like to do now is to open it up to the floor for questions and discussion.
Great. Well, thank you very much to all four of you for sharing your experiences and the implementation of the program. The 5 steps that the White Ribbon approach takes were very informative, and seeing how they rolled out differently in the 3 different sites in Nevada, Papua New Guinea, and Zambia were also interesting learnings. I think that it does have to make sure that you're responding to the specific cultural environment that you're working within. And we will just open it up for questions. If you do have a question, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webcast, you can look in the corner of your screen. You'll see a chat box, and you can use this box to put in your question. And while we're waiting for some of those questions to come in, there seem to be quite a few starting to come in now. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the response that you have from men when you ask them to get involved in this type of work, especially at the beginning and in cultures where this may not be something that they're really willing or have talked about in the past. So a little bit of information, Umberto, about that would be great if you could share some of your experiences.
Absolutely. So what the way that we start these conversations with men is by asking them about what kinds of lessons, pressures, teachings they received from a young age about what it means to be a man locally. What are some of the cultural pressures, cultural norms that are ingrained in boys and young men from a young age. So, and then we take it from there and we talk about how those pressures are not good for boys and not good for young men and adult men, and how then the ways that in which we are socialized contribute to our own behaviors, our own attitudes and beliefs towards women and girls in particular, and also towards other men. So it's a discussion that is conducted taking the local cultural context into consideration, and from there we build a sense of empathy and allyship and a sense of common understanding amongst the participants that it's in their best interest to get involved and to change these things around, because certainly the women and girls in the community, in the family, in the workplace are disproportionately impacted by these kinds of ways in which men are socialized to be, but also men and boys themselves are negatively impacted from that. So it's important, in addition to our own commitment and responsibility to promote human rights for everyone and to get involved and to create safer, welcoming, and inclusive conditions for women and girls in the family, in the community, in the workplace. It's in our interest to change these things around for ourselves as well. So the reaction to that kind of conversation is very positive, and in certainly thinking back about the meetings that I had, the discussions that I had with workers across those 3 sites, I saw a great deal of willingness, a great deal of realization and commitment amongst the participants to get involved and to do something to change this. I recall in particular in Papua New Guinea one man talking about his daughter and how he was so profoundly impacted by the violence that she experienced in the community, and how committed he was to work with other men, to work with leaders in the region to change this around. And by hearing that, by sharing that story with other male participants, he really helped to change people's minds and really helped to rally their participation.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that additional information, Umberto. We have another question around examples of increased retention and attracting more female candidates once this process was in place. So perhaps, Jessica, you could talk a little bit about what you've seen from Barrack's point of view, and maybe even how long it took for those positive indicators to start to show up once this training had been put in place.
Thank you. That's certainly a great question. I actually was going to see if Brian had any thoughts on that from the Nevada context where some of that training took place. I'm not sure if, Brian, you're able to jump in on that one.
Can you repeat that again, please? I'm sorry. Am I there?
Yeah, you're there, Brian. Just looking for a little bit more of examples of the impact that this training had on increased recruitment of women to the site, and also retention, and how long it took for those indicators to start to show a positive impact of this training.
Okay, so which is an amazing number down here with the Western Shoshone is we at the same time we were doing the white ribbon stuff, we also had a pretty aggressive Western Shoshone recruitment program, and we were able to employ quite a number of employees, and the amazing thing was that 40% were single mothers that worked at the mine site. So since 2012, when we started the recruitment of the Western Shoshone, 40% of that number are single mothers. And so the one thing that it would happen is they were it's the cultural strength of the Western Shoshone women, and they were able to, you know, whatever it took to take care of the family, they actually pursued the employment. And it's not easy, you know, when you're doing shift work and you may be gone for 5 days at a stretch, but they were able to put together such a support group at home that they were able to do it. So I think in anybody's mind, when you look at a number like that and 40% of the employment are single mothers, that just actually jumps out at you big time.
Great, thank you for that additional information. That's very helpful, and it shows the impact that this type of training has. We have another question around a bit more detail around the financial itinerary work that you did and how that impacted, because that was definitely seen as something that would have a positive impact, not just on the workers, but in the community and with spouses and that type of relationship. So if Umberto, maybe you could provide a bit more detail around that part of the training.
Yeah, sure. So the training was, I believe it was 2 days, offered over a 2-day period, and it went over from the basics of use of funds in the family. So how to budget, for example, how to engage in equal decision making with your spouse around how to spend those funds. The different forms of savings, things like the impact of interest, for example, the use of credit. So if you think about, you know, in terms of personal financing and all the issues that go around, along with effective management of finances, those were included. But the interesting part is that often that type of training, that type of education is focused solely on the financial aspects. But what we wanted to make sure was added was the gender equity aspects of financial management, right? So how does, for example, a couple engage in a healthy conversation around saving and using money and prioritizing the use of that money, how to make sure, for example, that the basics, the food and clothing for children and so forth are covered first before spending money on entertainment, before putting money aside for savings and for retirement and so forth. So the way in which the trainers addressed that was by talking about how men and women often engage in these kinds of conversations, and how men, for the most part, traditionally sort of take the lead in deciding how money is spent, and how to break away from that, and how to have conversations that are much more equal, that allow for healthy participation of both spouses in that discussion. So we worked, White Ribbon worked with the local consultants to infuse those aspects into the training program. And then what we saw from following up with local staff who provided supports to the community, who provided counseling to women, who ran a local shelter, they saw a definite impact in terms of numbers of people that were coming forwards and expressing, sharing their experiences of experiencing violence in the home as it relates to the issue of managing money. So there was I don't have the actual numbers right in front of me, but we saw a definite decrease in that.
That's great. Thank you so much. And we're nearing 1 o'clock, so we'll have to wrap things up. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but definitely a very important topic to be discussing. And we would really like to thank our 4 panelists in sharing their experiences and one example of how this issue can be addressed successfully within the workplace. As a reminder, if you enjoyed today's discussion, please invite your colleagues and contacts and sign up yourselves to join the next webinar webcast that will be on January 9th. And this one will focus on recruiting and retaining women in engineering programs. And also, please feel free to invite your colleagues and contacts to join the Ensemble Network as well. Thank you again, and we really appreciate the time of the 3 guest speakers, Brian, Chi, Umberto, and Jessica, and we wish you all a good day. Thank you for participating.